Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute or two or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Giebert, and today we're looking at BWV 1019C, the Sonata for Violin and Harpsichord in G major. In the BWV numbering system, which is the most popular way to organize Bach's works, this piece is often called the Violin Sonata in G major. I think this title is rather unfair because it is actually one of 6 sonatas for violin and harpsichord, and the harpsichord here plays just as important of a role as the violin soloist. And so I do prefer the title Sonata in G major for violin and harpsichord. And since Bach wrote 6 such sonatas, this one is the last one, number 6. But he also rearranged it, and as practical as he was, used it in various capacities even much later. There's even a version exists from after 1740, so later in his life, even though he would have written a lot of this music in its first draft before 1720, which is when he wrote most of his bigger instrumental collections. But since we have music that's been compiled from this period that shows that Bach used it at least 3 times in 3 different ways, that means we essentially have 3 different versions of BWV 1019, which is this sonata for violin and harpsichord. And so in the BWV system, we have 1019A and B and C. And so this one is the last one of the last 6 sonatas, and that's BWV 1019C. This was a listener suggestion from a listener who found us on Spotify. Our first movement has a beautiful flourish that spends a lot of time getting used to its home tonality of G major, a happy, cheerful allegro. Yeah, one thing I really love about this first movement is that at the beginning, without knowing what the time signature is supposed to be, the ear is a little thrown off. I thought, I was like, is this in 3/4? And I had to listen a little longer. Once you get like 20 seconds in, it becomes more clear. You hear this 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and the accents line up. But really the opening is a little bit confusing temporally. And I think the reason that is happening is because of the interplay of the 3 parts. The violin part up top, the right hand in the harpsichord, and then the left hand in the harpsichord. There isn't a lot of lining up happening until a few measures into this piece. In measure 11, we finally get bass notes landing on beats, strong beats, beats 1 and 3. That's the first time it happens. In the second part, a slow movement, largo, opens with some nice imitation, starting with the violin and then imitated in the right hand of the harpsichord. This movement's really short, almost transitional. And end by setting us up on a B major chord, which leads us into the next movement in E minor, remarkably for solo harpsichord. No violin in this movement. Just a really nice contrast to have this middle movement be harpsichord only. We now have an adagio, which begins in the key of B minor, and I say begins as a foreshadowing for later. It's just a sublimely beautiful and sad piece of music.
One thing I don't think it's talked about enough is Bach's rhythmic complexity. I mean, I think music of this era in Western music, most music historians agree that the really interesting thing about Western European music in this era is the polyphony, but less so the tone colors and the rhythms. And other cultures, especially East Asian and things like that, had much more interesting things going on with rhythms and tone colors. But let's not underestimate Bach's rhythmic capacity here. He is limited by sort of the structure of the music of the era, but instead of keeping things simple in a slow movement like this, in this fourth movement, he's constantly adding syncopation. Dum bum bum one da 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 ties da 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 da. Little ties here and there, and also the way he slurs the violin parts to accentuate the offbeats. Bum ba da bum ba. Those are all much more interesting choices than what he had to do, and he achieves that interesting sound because of the rhythm there.
It's worth saying that some of these syncopations that you mentioned, Alex, are a way to generate a lot of interest with the rhythm. But they are still following the rules of counterpoint. It's just much more interesting that some of these notes arrive late. These syncopations, the middle note, the long one that's accented by the bow and by its rhythm, also happens in the harpsichord. Generally, those tones are dissonant to the tone underneath, and they are resolved by going up, which is already somewhat unusual in Western music, usually resolved by going down. And the resolved note is delayed. It's the short note at the end of these three. It's the last note, the short one, at the end of these group of three notes. But the most stunning part is the end. And I choose this as my favorite moment of the entire thing. We do sort of have the end in beat 3 of measure 19 when we arrive at this cadence in B minor. Right here. But now what's it doing? It's going on, it's wandering a little. And it ended in D major on a really unusually weak cadence point of closure by just the bass stepping down. Which was done for a reason, and that is to sound more like a half cadence, that it will be moving on, and to sound not fully final, so that we can go into our G major allegro.
So here we get more of the rhythmic interest that I like. In the compound meter, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and Bach likes to favor high notes on the second note of that triplet, so bum 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 da 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 dum ba da 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 da, like that. And something I really love that's not even specific to Bach, but of course he does it really well, is just imitative counterpoint in this style in general. You'll hear the violin play something and the harpsichord will mirror it half a measure later. You'll hear that happen a lot until they arrive together at the end of a phrase and land on a cadence. I just like the musical metaphor of that. That's like having a conversation with somebody and probably being in agreement about something as your conversation is going back and forth with sounds that sound like they are in agreement. And then coming together at the end, it's almost like a little handshake. It's like, yep, that sounds good. Let's go. The metaphor is just very neat there.
Yes, and the idea of conversation between instruments and the importance of the harpsichord, and also the fact that it can be essentially two or more voices on its own because of the two hands, and that the right hand is written out for the most part in this work. That all is more evidence, I think, for my theory that we should call this the sonata for violin and harpsichord, rather than the Violin Sonata in G major.
And now, let's hear that moment again from the Violin and Harpsichord Sonata in G major, BWV 1019C. If you enjoyed this musical moment, there's a lot more violin and harpsichord music out there, written by J.S. Bach and performed by the Netherlands Bach Society. Please check out the link in the episode description. Do you want to suggest something for a moment of Bach? You can always find us on our website, amomentofbach.com, and make a suggestion right there. Thank you to all our listeners who are keeping us supported by listening. Just keep telling friends about the podcast. That's what we ask you. We found that the podcast speaks to people who are musicians and who are not musicians alike.
What's up for next week?
Next week we are looking at one of the more newly released recordings from Netherlands Bach Society. This is BWV 182, the cantata Himmelskönig sei willkommen.
Until next time, enjoy those moments.